Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Daydream Nation, and I've got two of the best YouTube commentators in the business, Pete Jones and Reed Little. How are you going, my friends?
Doing well, Peter. Nice to see you, Reed. Always a pleasure, sir.
Good to see you both.
We are going to talk about the 23rd studio album from Deep Purple called Equals One. So there it is. And we are going to talk about the songs, the performances, how this could possibly be the final Deep Purple album, and give our sort of analysis of what we think of this album. So, what I might do to start proceedings off is, Pete, there were three songs that were released off this album. What was your first impression of those songs, if any, in respect of this gateway to this new album?
Right. Yeah. Sometimes I'll listen to advanced singles, sometimes I won't. I know others have different views on whether they will or not. Um, I was more interested to hear because, of course, Simon has been with the band for a good period of time already. And there's a lot of live material out there. And I was very interested to see what his integration in a studio environment was going to be like with the band. And so I was listening from that standpoint, but I didn't dwell on any of them. And I maybe heard them one or two times, maybe three at the most, and then just let them sit and was kind of just waiting for the rest of the album. Um, I was very happy and excited about what I heard sonically and compositionally and performance wise, of course. So that did spark a bit of anticipation for me that when I was able to grab it, I got it as quickly as I could. So.
With that limited sort of integration with the three songs, was it positive or just sort of
Oh
neither?
no, absolutely.
Yep.
It was a lot of feelings of a great combination of things. A underlying familiarity, as I believe, and as we get further into the album, a theme will kind of pop up, for, at least from my experience. There is a beautiful tie between what I consider the old kind of school vintage purple with 2024 updated styles, sounds, delivery. And I think that's a wonderful thread to have, to be not completely shocked and go, I don't understand any of this, or have it to be too nostalgic and just go, there's nothing new here. It was a combination of both. It was 70s meets 2024. And I thought that was exciting. And that, again, that raised my and piqued my
Interest.
interest more. Yeah, it
Yeah. Well,
did.
I'm looking forward to hearing your views as we go deeper into the album track by track.
Sure.
Thank you. Reed, any impressions or did you just cut yourself off completely?
Yeah, I have a policy of never listening to advanced tracks. It's just the way my brain works, it does a disservice. Plus, I'm always skeptical of the people who choose singles that the single chosen is going to represent the album.
Right.
Also, you hope that an album will have some stylistic diversity and that not every song on the album is going to sound like the single, too. So it's bad both ways. Plus, I gave up streaming quality audio years ago. It has to be minimum CD quality before I listen to it. The only band that ever tempted me off that stance was Iron Maiden when they came out with Senjutsu, and I was so sorry that I broke that rule because the album sounded so much better once I got the actual CD. And everybody was like, "Oh, you can't hear this, you can't hear that," and I'm like, "No, because you're watching YouTube." And those frequencies
Right.
just aren't in the YouTube video. But
Right.
this time I held off and just waited until I had the album in my hands.
Yeah, nice. I went in a deep dive into the three songs and I did three clips on my YouTube channel in 7 minutes, and I loved them. And there was a stylistic diversity with the three songs, but there was also this lineage back to the 70s, as Peter alluded to, that really warmed my heart. So the anticipation for this album was immense. And I was actually on a flight coming back from America and looking at social media, and a lot of the folks in our circle were talking about it. So I relented and got it on Spotify and listened on the plane a few times. But it wasn't until I finally got the physical copy, which I bought and put it in the car, and it's been with me all week. And I must have listened to it at least, it seems like 40 times. So you've really got to listen to an album multiple times. I'm not a big sort of believer in listening to it once or twice and banging out a review. I think you really got to get really deep into it. Now, gents, before we get into the album track by track, I want to talk to you about the album cover. I'll say straight off the bat, it's a little bit disappointing. You've got this spindly italics. It's very small eye type of an album cover for a band that has a big, ballsy, bold, hard rock sound. Pete, what do you think?
I don't care for it. But in my world, as a non-physical media kind of person, I don't listen to things. I will be introduced to them, let me clarify, through YouTube, but I listen to even the advanced tracks were available on high res through a couple of the paid streaming services I use. And then I purchased mine as a 96K 24-bit high res download that I decode through an outboard digital analog converter back through my system. So I'm getting as high resolution as I can possibly get, which is even higher resolution than a compact disc. You could debate whether you think that's better or not. Those are your own ears. So covers don't mean as much to me anymore because I'm not collecting them or looking at them in that aspect. But I do think it is if we want to use lazy sod appropriately, I think that thing is about as cheap looking as it gets.
Yeah, and I mean, when you compare it to the 70s, like Deep Purple have at least got three album covers that are right up there as the best album covers of all time. In rock,
It mattered.
iconic.
It mattered then.
Yeah, Machine Head, Burn, and you've got this, which is just really just doing it backwards. This is the inner sleeve, actually. You've got like some sort of black hole. But yeah, it's just very small eye type material, equals one. Reed, what do you think of it? I think, no, you've got some strong opinions about it.
I do. I think it's crap. I think they ought to be ashamed for using this idea. The inside cover, now, obviously that doesn't have anything to do with equals one, which is fine because it's a stupid title. So this album is begging you to not buy it based on first impressions. And there are still people who collect records. And if you're somebody who collects records, is this going to be something that you're proudly displaying? No. It looks like, your kindergartner made it, although they would have nice penmanship. So that would be something. But it's a stupid title. It's not even in the lyrics of the album. The album has the lyric, "It all adds up to one," which would have been a better title than Equal One. Plus, Equal One is designed to not be search engine optimized because the search engines don't like that equal sign. So it's got a lot of problems all the way around. But kind of, as Peter is alluding to, Peter Jones in this case, for those of you who didn't notice, we have two Peters on this channel. I just don't know that really matters to people anymore. What really matters, let's face it, is this getting into the Spotify algorithm for suggested plays? And I never use Spotify, so I have no idea. But that's what's going to determine the success or failure of this album. But in terms of if I were at a store and looking at an album, I would have presumed that this was like a B-sides album or, some quickly knocked off crap. I certainly wouldn't have bothered picking it up without doing some research on it in advance.
Yeah.
I think they should
It
niche it.
almost looks like the outer box of an old 2-inch reel tape back in the studio days, or somebody
Yes.
just wrote the label on it and said, and inside there'll be track listings and scribble notes from the board. That's what it looks like to me.
Yeah, look, I think this is a band that does a big print, big font, Deep Purple, because it's a big ballsy album. All right, let's get into the songs. So I'll go to you, Pete. The first song, Show Me. Take it away. What do you think of this song?
This is really great. And again, I think it's really, really important at this stage of their career when they bring in somebody new that they bring out original material. There's too many other bands, and that's a whole different other show, that brings in somebody new. They go on and on as that band and never bring out anything new or don't do any studio records. And I think that is wrong. So this is really important on a lot of different levels. And like I mentioned earlier, having heard what Simon was doing live, man, I was really excited. And what do we get right off the shot is just something really fun and glorious. This is a great opening track. And to my ears, the nostalgia part instantly clicked in, and follow my logic here. If you take Ian's hi-hat, his eighth note pattern, transfer it over to snare drum, we get the driving, dry picking from Simon, delayed bass, in the upper range of the bass. You've got Highway Star, folks. It's Highway Star, just rearranged a bit different. And right off from the very beginning of the opening track, I'm going, this feels really good. And it sounds good. And of course, bam, they break right into this very heavy, and this is a word that's just going to be overused, so I will just concede to the court. Most of these riffs in here are very aggressive. There's a lot of weight to them, and I just love how much energy and power they're delivering here. This sounds like a band, and it's just cohesive. Gillan is remarkable. He's just absolutely, age be damned, his voice sounds incredible. We talked on a show, and I was mentioning how I liked his vocals on Bananas. This is far superior to that. This is vintage in my ears. Absolutely 70s. Not, he doesn't have the range. Let's be fair and let's call a spade a spade. This, but in his delivery, his wordsmanship, his tonality, I love he's even got the classic little laugh in there, and it's vintage Ian Gillan. And they're not doing a lot of double tracking, which you guys know I can't stand when they do that with Gillan. And he's really carrying the weight here, and he sounds amazing. And if I don't mention my friend here, he's off into some world of Fountain of Youth or something, because Pacey, this is his best playing since Moments of Battle Rages On. And even some of the earlier albums before that, it's just, I don't know where it came from, but he is playing his sticks off. And I love the energy. What I love right off the bat is I'm surprised. We get to the first solo section and it's not organ. We hear it's synthesizer. It's different. We're getting synth from Don Airey in a Deep Purple record. And then all of a sudden they're trading off 2 bars, 2 bars, 2 bars. And then they fly off into this ridiculous 30-second note pattern. And they're just tight as can possibly be, right back into the stunning just wall of sound, a nice tight ending. And I am happy on just about every possible level that the way this record is starting. So I think it's a great, great track, and show me they did.
Thanks, Pete. Reed.
Okay. Well, as is usually my role on these things, I'm going to have some negative comments to say. So I want everybody to understand I really enjoy this album. So when I say negative things, those are nitpicking to an extent. But I think that I have heard from several commentators about this album being kind of a return to form. And, Pete hears what he hears. I hear what I hear. I think you're overselling it a little bit. This album is 80% 21st century Deep Purple and maybe 20% 70s. Simon McBride, I think, is much more similar to Steve Morse than he is to Ritchie Blackmore. So, yes, Ian Gillan, this is, I will go on record and say, I think this is Gillan's best performance in a decade, at least. Don Airey sounds amazing. Pace sounds very, very good, although I'll have more to say about that in a little bit. You mostly can't hear Roger Glover, and we'll talk about that too. But McBride is not Ritchie Blackmore. I don't know how he handles the Blackmore era songs live, but he kind of supplies a melody and then does the virtuoso solos. He's not a riffer. So he doesn't bring that 70s sensibility. I mean, hell, he's 30 years younger than anybody else in the band. So, but when you've got a new guitar player, you have to show the world what he can do. And what he does is solos, and his solos are amazing. What he doesn't do is riffs. If you really want a throwback album, you have to have riffs. And there are a few, but he's much more of just a melody guy. Now, I will say, I think the album sounds great. I think all of the Bob Ezrin produced albums in this late era have sounded great. The frequencies are all in the right place, but I don't think that it's an album of equals. I think Ian Gillan is the star of this album, period. He's here. His vocals are way up front. They are ultra clear. You can hear everything he's doing. Next is Don Airey.
Mm-hmm.
And even though this album starts, I love the fact that it starts with guitar, because that instantly made me go, ooh, hey, here we go. This is going to have a lot of Simon on it. Well, guess what? As soon as Gillan starts singing, Simon takes a back seat, Airey steps up. And Airey is on much more of this record in my hearing than Simon McBride is. Simon is third. The first couple of times I listened to it, I barely heard the drums or bass at all. Now, on subsequent albums, after I started really paying attention to it, I was like, okay, the drums are there. I was just tuning them out like I always do. The bass is almost entirely absent except for a couple of songs. And it's because he's mimicking the lines that Simon McBride is playing. And Simon is getting so much more sonic space that there's only a couple of times where you get to hear Roger Glover at all. So this is a very busy band, and they are filling up those frequencies. But that having said, I think it's great. I enjoyed Whoosh. Peter Kay and I have talked about our favorite Deep Purple albums. We both really enjoyed Whoosh. But on Whoosh, you get this feeling that Ian Gillan has accepted his place as the elder statesman of hard rock. The man is 78 years old. In fact, fun fact, I have tickets to see him in concert on his 79th birthday. I am looking forward to that. But all of that's out the window. That elder statesman stuff, he's decided that's not him anymore, and he is up for it. And we're going to talk about exactly what he appears to be up for, starting with the next song, because this is unquestionably the horniest album that Ian Gillan has done in decades.
Well,
I mean, no judgment. the guy's 78 years old, but oh man, he wants to talk about sex.
Well,
We'll get to it.
You beat me to the punch because this album is a lot of self-reflection, but it's an album about sex. And, 78, yeah, go for it. Show Me. I think it's a cracker of a song. It sounds like a fast stopwatch. It's got a pulse. There's urgency about it. It's adrenalized. I can actually hear Roger Glover. There's this grumbling bass, which is mixed with the keyboard. There's a lot of urgency. It's an infectious hook. I actually think that the tone of Simon McBride reminds me of Yannick Gears when he came into the Gillan band on Double Trouble. You might remember Yannick Gears was related as a bit of a Blackmore clone, but there's a bit more of the tonality that's closer to Blackmore than Morse. I think there's DNA on both eras and DNA on both guitarists, but I think it's a little bit more towards Blackmore. But I think this is an outstanding song. There's a lot of urgency, and he lays down the gauntlet for the topics of this album, which are very much of a sexual nature. Pete, a bit on the side, which reinforces what I've just said. What do you think of this song?
Well, it kind of speaks for itself, doesn't it? Sometimes you're not really sure where Mr. Gillan is kind of going with things. Sometimes he just picks words because they rhyme well and rhythmically they work great. But sometimes he just kind of beats you over the head with a Punch and Judy stick, and you go, "Okay, I get it," I get it. To kind of piggyback on both what Peter and what Reed was saying, talk about a Sonics for a second here. And I will also say some things that I have some concerns about. I think the mastering on this is just slightly a bit too hot for my like. There's a little bit of distortion that can come in on his hi-hats. And it does have, at times, a slightly harsh top end. And to me, that just means they've just got that push just a little bit too much. And that is a concern for me. The other one is one I don't think I would ever have said in all my years. I don't like the tonality of Ian Pace's snare drum. And I'm about to be hit by lightning because he's always been my reference point for the best sounding snare ever. And I've always used that as my reference point when I play live. And to my ears, it's a little tinny and it's a little too recessed in the mix. I don't have that crack that I want to counter what is going on from the rest of the instrumentation. The bass drum's solid, and you can hear his toms. They sound great, and his cymbals sound really good. His ride especially. And there's a lot less of that crazy China that he overplays on some of the other albums. Regular, more crashing and that type of thing. Simon isn't Ritchie, you're right. And I agree with Reed that for the most part, more of these songs tend to be much more Morse in stylistic approach, in composition, and everything else. The difference is that Simon, in my opinion, is a more aggressive player. He plays with a lot more picking strength. It's very edgy. It's a very full tone. I really love the tone. And people can correct me and maybe read. He's a PRS guy, I believe, who plays through angles. It's Ritchie's amp of choice. And I don't know if he's coil splitting or anything on there, but it does not sound single coil to me. It's still got a humbucking kind of thickness to it, which you will never confuse with Ritchie, because Ritchie will always have that cutting, and he even undoes his middle pickup. It doesn't even exist. So there's only neck and bridge for him. So, and I do think there are a lot of riffs here. Maybe what I hear, especially in a bit on the side, is that there is a lot of unison riffing so far, that Don Airey and Simon are playing the exact same things. And when Don is further in the mix and has an instrument that carries a wider frequency range, the organ is a more broad instrument than that guitar. Simon's kind of lose that battle in masking and that kind of thing. But what do we have here? It's a great double bass underneath. From when was the last time Ian was playing double bass on anything? We got to go way back.
Big sound.
It's what's that?
Big sound.
Oh,
huge.
Yeah. It's just got a great feel though. And then underneath, it's a, and I dare to say this, and I will give credit. I heard this on another site. It is almost a little Zero the Hero-ish, just slightly, not off the charts. We won't lose our minds here. Great verse. I love the chorus is just, and again, not subtle. You get to good fills here, and it's a staple of Purple that they like to change keys when they go to the solo sections, because they're writing in a key that is good for Gillan vocally, and then they switch to a key that is great for the instrumentation to solo over, and they go back and forth. And I think that's exciting. A lot of cool drum fills. There's a great drum breaks from Pacey, and his drums sound huge in there. It's heavy. The guitar solo in this is slightly more Blackmore-ish. And they add a nice kind of second guitar part to it. And he even has a little slight moment of the Brad Gillis whammy bar, getting those harmonics out of tune and getting that dissonant beat frequencies going on between two of them. And I love that we're 2 for 2. And again, where there's more synthesizer here, not organ yet. We're 2 for 2, no organ solo yet. And another nice tight ending, no fades. So, I'm happy, 2 tracks in and like where they're going. So,
Reed, bit on the side. What do you think?
Okay, so I think it's a great song. I love the fact that the opening of the album is keeping the energy up, especially you keeping it up. We'll get into that. You're talking about, again, these are very old men other than Simon McBride. Right. And just funny story, I had no idea who Simon McBride was, except that I own a Boss multi-effect unit that has patches created by Simon McBride. Oh. So when I saw that they had picked Simon McBride for Deep Purple, I was like, the Boss patch guy? Okay. But I had no idea what he played like or anything. I just saw his name on this list of patches. So Simon has said in interviews that he is a Gary Moore guy. Now, you don't get a lot of Gary's style of play from Simon, but what you get is Gary's style of interaction with Don Airey, who, let's not forget, played for Gary Moore. And when you hear those really fast unison passages between the keyboards and the guitar, that was Gary Moore and Don Airey basically patented that. I mean, you hear it from a lot of bands, but not at that same level. Those guys were the masters of that in the early 80s. And that's really what you get from Simon and Don. I think he's very comfortable in that. And actually, if I remember correctly, Simon has actually toured with Don Airey doing like a tribute to Gary Moore. But again, you don't get the same bluesy kind of arpeggiated, fast arpeggiated stuff that Gary was so fond of. He's a very different, dare I say, Steve Morse-esque kind of soloist. Now, for anybody who some of, especially when Peter Jones and I get into slight disagreements on things like riffs, a lot of it gets down to semantics. If you want to be really pedantic, any repeated short group of notes could be called a riff, right? To me, when I think of riffs, I am very specifically thinking of it in my context, like a Black Sabbath, like a Judas Priest. In heavy metal, the riff is the song, right? You couldn't do Iron Man without Tony's riff from Iron Man. That is, so Simon is playing riffs because he's doing repeated lines on the guitar. He's not doing my definition of riffs where the song is what he's playing, because you could take that out and the song would still have the same melody. It would still have the same tempo, the riff is not driving what happens in the music. What is driving what happens in the music is Ian Gillan. And I think that where we get the hooks on this album, they are from the vocals, which is why it's good that Gillan has stepped up to deliver such an awesome vocal performance. But this song is so freaking modern because it's a story about when Gillan talks about sex or drinking, you never get the idea that he's talking about some nebulous other person. He's talking about Ian Gillan.
Right.
So Ian Gillan is drinking at a bar and he meets a trans woman, but he is into it. He's like, yeah, it's all good. Let's go. And I'm like, whoa, what a modern sentiment. I knew Ian was a pretty take them as they come kind of guy, but I didn't know he was quite so open-minded. This is really like a Generation Z kind of anthem, right? So this would be content that was shocking in the 1980s. This would have gotten you banned in Reagan's America. But now I'm like, I don't know, is he pandering to new audiences? Because he has kids and presumably grandkids. I haven't looked into his family tree. But I presume he's been exposed to the attitudes of the younger generation. And there are a couple of places in this album where I think he's incorporated some of those themes, but none more strongly than in this song. When he started talking about, your makeup doesn't cover your 5 o'clock shadow, but it's all right.
It's okay.
Oh,
it's okay.
yeah.
Not that there's nothing wrong with that.
Whatever makes you happy, Ian.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I think Ian Gillan's at a point in his career that he just doesn't care. He's unfiltered. And that's what I like. I think his lyrics are quite loose. In fact, his whole persona, his vocals are very loose. And that's what makes this album magic, because he just doesn't give a damn. This is the way I feel and I'm expressing myself. But let's not give the viewers a wrong impression. There's a couple of songs where there's some deep heart sentimental feelings, and it's really sort of quite emotional, and we'll get into that later in the album. Pete, the thing about this song that I don't like is the keyboard of Don Airey. I hate that synthesizer. He pulls it out for Show Me, which I can get away with, which is kind of that David Patch Toto, goes into that different melody, and it's very exciting. But he pulls it out again on the second track, and I've listened to this album multiple times, and it annoys the crap out of me. I don't like when Don Airey does that twinkly keyboard. And there are some artistic choices that Don Airey brings into the keyboard. I wish that he'd go to a piano or a Hammond and just, put the synthesizer to the side. So maybe that's just the way I hear it. Casey's playing out of his skin. A lot of it is jazzy freeform. I was thinking of you when I was listening to this song, these little fills, and I was thinking, oh, Pete would love that.
Yeah, they're tasty as heck.
Just these little fills. I just said to Pete at the start of the show, offline, what was he having for breakfast? It's just monstrous. Yeah. It's just got a big sound. I love the whammy bar, McBride. He's just got this wall of sound. I think it's a cracker second track. So 1, 2, punch, punch. They're really in fine shape. So we go to the third song, Pete, Sharpshooter. I think this song's a hell of a lot of fun. Did you think so?
Yeah, it's a more mid-tempo. It's very heavy. But once again, 3 songs in, we've got real heavy unison playing between Don and Simon. And one of the things that is starting to concern me through this point is not unlike what you were saying about synthesizer, because even in this one, he goes to a synthesizer solo again, 3 tracks in. And one of the staples of The Beauty of Purple was that, and Don has always been so respectful to what John Lord had done and what he brought to the band, but is always still himself. And that balance has always worked for me. I think so far, 3 tracks in, I would have preferred from a number of reasons. The first being, if he does more of a color dancing in and out of what Simon and Roger are doing, it makes that guitar riff cleaner, heavier, because it takes that extra sonic weight off those frequencies, gives you something else to listen to. Pick your spots. Have him do a riff, come in at the end with a punch or a swell, or augment it with a chord or two somewhere. That's what I'm still waiting for. And I'm 3 tracks in and I hadn't heard it yet, because right now it seems, I don't want to say too easy, or it's just they keep playing the same things together. And I want them to do something separate because they're that good, and that's how I like to hear that. There's a nice shaker that comes in to give it a little bit of tonality. All through the album, tambourines come in at the right time, and a shaker will come in to kind of break up the rhythmic spectrum of what's going on, just kind of push things ahead a little bit. We have these oohs and ah backing vocals, which is kind of surprising. That's not a real Deep Purple staple. I don't want to say I disliked them, but I probably would be happy if they kind of went away. I was, just go ahead with what you're doing, because, you're all right. You've got plenty of melody. Your chorus is fine. There's a kind of a ramping up where Pacey goes to snare, on all fours in kind of the bridge section. And the synth solo to me stands out not so much with what Don is playing, it's the underlying riff. That is crushingly heavy. And I just dismissed what Ari was doing altogether and just focused on what the rest of the band was doing underneath. And that was enjoyable as all get out. And then the guitar takes over, and it always raises the level. All the solos that Simon has done so far always kind of give it a lift. He's got such sweeping tonality, beautiful vibrato. He's different than Richie's, who's probably my favorite vibrato, but they're different players. But his note choice and everything so far has just been so spot on. Back to the verse, some more oohs in the backing vocals, but it's just kind of a driving track. And again, what I do like is three songs in, no fade outs. You have a proper ending, and I love that it just is clean, done. And I like that. And so far from that aspect, I think they're hitting it out of the park compositionally on that aspect of it. So,
do you think, Pete, maybe this song could have been shifted towards the end of the record so there was a little bit more variety? Because you're saying 1, 2, 3, you got that, similar Don Airey keyboard solo. There's a bit of a similarity. Do you think maybe they could have shifted it towards the back end?
No, I would say no. Only because while there is a similarity in the stylistic way that they're playing the riffs and the chords, we've had 3 very different tempos and very different feels. This is the much more kind of mid-heavy. We had a double bass one before that, and we had a kind of more aggressive, propulsive opening track. So from that aspect, I'm okay with it rhythmically, how that's flowed so far, 3 tracks in. And as we get later on, I like where the rest of those tracks fall in the end, and I'm not really ready yet to move those around yet.
Yeah, okay. No worries. Thanks, Pete. Reed, what do you think of this song, Sharpshooter?
Oh, I like it. One thing that I really struggled with as we go through the middle section of tracks, because the album is not riff-based. Anybody, if you want to know what I mean by riff-based, just go listen to any of the Ozzy or Dio era Black Sabbath albums, or like this week I bought the new Fu Manchu album, stoner rock, but 100% riff-based, and it could not be more stylistically different from a melody-based band. to an absolutely riff-based band. And Deep
Right.
Purple at this phase of their career are a melody-based band because that's what Ian wants to sing over. This is I know they like to come off as a band of equals. I do not think they are. I'm not in the band. What do I know? It's just how it appears when I've read the interviews and things with Ian. He's very proprietary. But regardless, as Pete said, this is the third song where we don't just get a synthesizer solo. It's the same structure. Synthesizer solo followed by guitar solo. And we get that structure in all but one song. So that's something that I really think that they could have mixed up a little bit more, or had a section that was just guitar solo and then back to verse and then just keyboard solo. Because usually if you go back to classic Purple, Richie and John were separated. They were like the fighting kids in the room. You would not have them playing back to back. So that is something that I think would have enhanced the listening experience. And again, not that the sound of the songs is similar, but because the structure is similar and because there's no real hook from my mind. Other people, their minds work differently. But from my mind, when I finish these songs, I don't remember them in their specifics. What I remember are individual lines of the lyrics. Like in this one, he's got a line about the old bushwhacker yodeling up the canyon. Don't think about that one too hard. But then I remember, and it's got a keyboard solo right next to the guitar solo again. And that, because the songs are not otherwise set to hooks, there's a little bit of a sameness in my memory of the album. But
excellent point. Excellent point.
In the end of it, I enjoy the album. Here's my test for whether I really like an album or not. When I'm playing it out, I have a little music player that plays high def audio. How often do I check the counter? That's how I know if I enjoy an album. Because if I'm not enjoying it, I'm looking to see how long I have left to listen to it. And I never do with this album. I enjoy it while it's going. But once the song is over and they move on to the next one, I will have forgotten everything about it. Except possibly Ian Gillan yodeling up the canyon. Maybe that's just my issue. Maybe that's something that I need to work on.
Well, as I said, I think Gillan's just very unfiltered, and it's at a point of his career that he's just putting it down on paper and singing it. I think this is the funniest song on the album. I think they're having a ball. He sounds relaxed. It's humorous. It's got double entendres galore. I wrote down stripper rock. We've had a conversation about this. So I think Deep Purple are putting a late mature entry into stripper rock because it's got a bit of a swagger, a bit of a groove to it. Pete, I do have an issue with the drum sound on this particular song. There is a little bit of cymbal bleed. I heard that on Spotify and I thought, ooh, maybe it's the medium. CD in the car, CD in my stereo, there is a little bit of bleed, cymbal bleed. And that's not really, that's a negative. That should not be happening for a producer and a band like Deep Purple. Right. Backup singers, the last time that Deep Purple even were within cooey of backup singers was when they did the concerto for group and orchestra. They did a bit of a road show. Ronnie James Dio was part of it, and they did have backup singers. So it adds a little bit of a soul dimension, a little bit of depth. But I agree, it could either live with it or live without it. I think McBride's guitar lines are incisive and cutting. Don Arian, that spacey keyboard line, I'm over it. So, I mean, to me, it's like difficult to cure. Leave it for that. It's not Deep Purple. I want to hear the warm, rich sounds of the Hammond. I want to hear piano lines. I want to hear blues. I don't want to hear these twinkly, spacey keyboard lines on a Juno or your Roland keyboard. Park it. But I like the song. It's relaxed. It's probably the funniest song on the album. I had a smile on my face. So anyway, Portable Door. This was the first single on the album. Pete, what do you think of this song?
Well, you can't have a Deep Purple record if you don't have at least one shuffle, right? So, and here we are with the infamous, and I've said it before on other shows, I'll just reiterate it again. Ian Pace does not like to play the traditional shuffle pattern. He doesn't, the swing beat, whatever you do, he likes to play it in quarter notes. And that's the way that he's always done it, and that's the way they're doing it again. And so it's kind of got a little bit of a pictures of home, right? Little vibe to it that's kind of similar. It's once we get right into the verse, what do we have here? Again, key and guitar doubling each other. No variation, no contrapuntal or supportive lines or whatever. Dead on unison. And I'm like, okay, we've heard a lot of that so far, and we add some second vocal to the chorus area back to the original riff. It's a much more traditional structured song. Get your verse, chorus, back to the head riff, another verse, chorus, and we get into the solo section, and we do have organ here finally, but a lot of his time in his solo part of the song is him just doing a bunch of hand swipes, and I'm like, okay, I get that, and there's a place for it, but I'm like, on the first organ, the beauty of what John always did is that most of the time you could sing his keyboard solos because they were that melodic, because he would focus on a one-hand approach. So his left hand may sparsely add, chordal accompaniment, but not very often. Don likes to do two-hand. Don adds extra notes with that left hand, even in the main frequency of where he's playing his regular solo. So when you watch him, he plays this way, not down like John did. John is a one-handed player. And that makes the melody line a little more concise, a little cleaner. So this one's a little bit messy for me. It is a great solo from Simon. And I like that. Back to the chorus, another verse, which sounds great. The riff still sounds really heavy. And back to the opening riff, tight ending, and they're out. If you're going to put out a single, and I'm not a singles person, I really just like albums because, Reed was mentioning, I don't want anything to define and then have someone go, oh, you don't like the single, it's so popular. I'm like, well, it's just somebody's arbitrary trying to make you like it, and let's not confuse popular with whether I like it or dislike it. Just because it's a single doesn't automatically mean I have to like it. But it's the most straightforward of the tracks they've done so far. More traditional in its style, like I said. Good song? Yes. Great song? Probably not. I've enjoyed the first three, sour notes notwithstanding, than I did on this one, although I will never be unhappy with a shuffle. So at least from that aspect, there's a familiarity and a comfort to that's old school to my ears. So I enjoyed that.
So maybe it was a very safe choice for the first single, Pete.
I think it's safe.
Just to say, hey, Deep Purple's back.
Yeah, you're not going to offend anybody for the most part on this. I mean, it's got the organ, it's got a good guitar solo. It's
all the parts are there.
Yeah,
all the components. All there. Reed, what did you think of Portable Door?
All right, so I don't have much in-depth to say about this. I enjoyed the song. Again, I think it keeps the energy up. I'm mostly in it at this point for Gillan's vocals. We're on song 4. I like his lyrics, he's got all sorts of weird things that come in and out of his portable door. I don't want to think about that too hard. But it's not a super memorable song. And if I had heard that as the first single, I don't know that I would have been, oh man, I can't wait to hear more of this album. I think it's a great fourth track. It's perfectly fine. I enjoy it while it's going on, but they really, I think, did a much better job picking "Show Me" as the opening track for the album, because that is much more of an attention getter than "Portable Door" was. And I will say, for those looking for a '70s throwback, one, to quote Mr. Ian Gillan, "Unchain your brain." These dudes are 78 years old. They don't write like they're, like they did 50 years ago. They never will again. But like I said, it's 20% '70s. I would not compare this to In Rock. I would not compare this to Machine Head. I think it's 20% Who Do We Think We Are? And that's because Who Do We Think We Are is much more John Lord oriented than Ritchie Blackmore oriented. And this album is much more Don Airey oriented than it is Simon McBride. Now, Simon, he makes the most of every opportunity he gets. Like I said, he nails those unison lines with Don Airey. He produces beautiful solos. But this is the thing, and why I think that this album's a little safe. We'll probably talk about that when we get to the end. But there's no song on this album that I go, that wouldn't have worked with Steve Morse. The rest of the band is still writing like Steve Morse is in the band. And I think Simon is probably being younger and more into the older stuff. He's probably bringing them back a little bit. I haven't watched it came with a documentary of some sort. Who knows? Maybe I'll watch the documentary and it turns out my opinion is completely wrong. I haven't watched it yet. But that's the impression I get, is that Simon is a little bit more aggressive. He wanted to be a little bit more upfront rock and roll and a little less casual. There's the word I was looking for. Ian Gillan, for all of the 21st century, has been too casual. When I saw them on the tour for Bananas, he was in a freaking Hawaiian shirt and flip-flops.
He usually doesn't wear shoes at all.
It doesn't get much more casual than that, although I guess given Ian proclivities, it could have been a little worse. But he is really putting in the effort on this album. And again, he's the star player on this whole album for me, is bringing the energy and the enthusiasm. None of which is about this specific song, because again, I like it. I enjoy it while it's on, and as soon as it's over, I move on to the next one. I'll have a lot more to say about Old Fangled Thing.
I won't have too much to say about Portable Door that I hadn't said on my channel. It's a safe song. I love Gillan's vocals. They have that warm tonality. You feel like he's right up with the microphone, and I think that it's in a really nice key. So he's in the pocket, but as a song, it's kind of safe. I had a quiet optimism for the subsequent songs to come out and the rest of the album, but other than that, I wouldn't say it's the best song on the album. It's solid. And as for Ian Gillan backstage, I think if you thought he was casual on stage, Reed, stories I've heard about backstage. Old Fangled Thing, Pete Jones. What do you think of this one?
Well, this one is interesting to me, and the intro stands out because, at least to my ears, so far this many tracks in, everything seems to be eighth note and kind of shuffly driven. Pretty straight. This is the first one that introduces a little triplet feel. And that really kind of stood out to me. I'm like, oh, a triplet. Da, 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 ba, ba, I'm like, oh, that's different than chunk, 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 and heavy grinding 8th and 16th notes. So that sounded different. This one, I do think that Roger's bass is way up front in the mix. I hear him a lot on this. I don't like Ian's snare drum sound on this one. I like it's a little more prominent, which when you don't care for the snare is not a good thing. Some good fills. He's busy. And then we get to walking quarter notes in the bass line, which is very interesting. It's stylistic choice that I found kind of unique. It was a nice change of pace from the tracks before that. The verses are fine. They go back to the opening riff. And to me, when he gets into something like, it's early days, unfinished tune, you know how it is, and Reed had mentioned it, to me, this is No One Came. And, this is that era. It's got that kind of delivery, because he may be 78 years old, but his speaking voice and still sounds like Ian from back in the day, and he does those little color talking lines that he does, and it's him, and it just sounds really, really familiar. They do a complete style change in the middle of this one. This is the first real track they do that in. All the rest of them have kind of carried the initial feel and style through the rest of the song all the way to the end. It gets into a kind of much more slower and grinding feel on this. Simon's solo is strong on this. They do this great kind of riff breakdown. I think the bass is probably one of the loudest instruments going through this, through the keyboard solo. And again, I'm not going to, keep harping. We've got another fully finished tight ending, which I love. I'm not a fan of fade outs. I want you to have a composition that starts and stops. And it's a great track. It's got a lot of energy. Is it, more memorable or less memorable than the others? I would think they're all kind of on par. And I think Reed has made a very good point that melodic content and vocal stylistic delivery aside, they are starting to blend a bit. And that is that when you look at the track listing, you're going, how does that one go again? And then you hear the vocal line, you go, oh yeah, now I remember. But the titles aren't triggering. And that is something to pay attention to, because when you can't associate a song quickly or directly to its title, it's either a combination of not enough listens or there's something just not catching.
Yes.
And when more than one person in a three-person panel is starting to say that, something to be concerned about. So.
Okay. Thanks, Pete. Reed.
All right, so Old Fangled Thing was the first song that I truly loved on this album. I think, especially because I'm a guitar player-oriented listener, and because Simon was the new member of the band, I was kind of hypersensitive to what he was going to bring to the music. And I think invariably it's the slower, looser tracks where Simon really shines. Some of that is going to be because of how he is as a player. Some of it is physics. Once you play at a certain speed, there's just nothing memorable about it anymore. I make this point all the time. I know people get annoyed with me for it, but where you differentiate yourself is on slower playing. That's where you have vibrato. That's where you have, the word is lyrical, and it literally means it sounds like you're singing.
Right.
So that's the type of playing that you get on these slower pieces. I love Ian Gillan's lyric in this song. Completely unironic. I love it. He's in the Ian Gillan, again, he's in a bar, so it's not some random person. Ian's singing about himself. And he's looking for creative inspiration and relating the idea of seeking creative inspiration to interaction with a lover. And when he finds it, it's energetic. And when he can't find it, it's just the same old thing, and it gets him down. And the whole thought is just beautiful, this idea of making art about making art. And then the song has a looser structure, and it goes into an honest-to-God groove section. There's a breakdown, and Ian Pace starts grooving on the drums. The whole band loosens up. And I'm like, oh, yeah, this is it, man. I love that. Now, an entire album of that would not have worked. And that's one thing that I really give them credit for on this album. Even though, I'm complaining that it's structurally a little similar. I would have liked more hooks to remember things by. They do put in some different styles. And it's the songs that are of a different style. There's no jazz fusion in this. No, there aren't really jazz fusion players, but that kind of unison keyboard and guitar fusion is probably the best description for it. There's none of that. You just get a much looser, more interpretive song, and I think that allows all the musicians to shine, and it sounds a little better to me. And honestly, most fast songs, I think they're probably a little bit more enjoyable if you drop the tempo just a couple of beats. And it gives you a little bit of something to hang on to. But anyway, I love this song. I unapologetically love it. And this was the one where I was kind of going, I don't know about all these people saying that that there's a lot of 70s in this album. This was the song that I went, oh yeah, okay. This could have been on Who Do We Think We Are?
Well, I've got a slightly different take to this, gents. I think this is like a long lost track off the Gillan Band a la Future Shock. It's got that very ramshackle loose feel. It's very unpolished. It's engaging. It's a little bit punkish. And I think they're just having a ball. Pete, again, the cymbal sound, as you would say, it's a little hot. There's a little bit of bleed. So that's slightly on the concerning, but other than that, I think this is the loosest song on the album. And repeating myself, I think it sounds like the Gillan Band in 1981 with Bernie Tormé and the gang. So yeah, I like it. I think it's a nice little palate cleanser to the rest of the album. A little bit of variation, and they sound like they're having a ball. All right. If I were you, so going a change of tempo, a bit of a ballad. Pete, were you sold on this song?
Yeah, I like this, and in all fairness, when you listen to an album for the first time in order, you can only make your assessments only on what you've heard so far. So when I heard this, I thought, yes, this is a solid ballad. Big, huge organ chords underneath supporting this. The tempo is great. A little more space, a little time to breathe a little bit. The tracks have all been pretty thick up to this point. There's a lot going on there, and to be able to break this down a little bit and give it a little more air and some room to kind of ferment a bit and speak is nice. Gillan sounds great. His voice is very strong. He's always been so wonderful, and and I know that they'd fix it in the studio and everything, but even the zillion live things I've heard from him, I think I could count on one hand and get rid of four fingers the times he's been out of pitch. He's so strong internally, and he just sounds so good here. I like how it progresses. It's more open and spacious to start. We get into the second verse, a little more chunk underneath from Simon, which is nice because he's just doing it by himself. He's not doing it in unison with anybody else. And then they go into this broken rhythmic pattern that I really like. And now, because the sonic spectrum has changed, Ian's drums are a little more transparent. They're a little more forward because there's not as much masking it because of the reduced impact of the instrumentalists. We get to the solo section, and here is one of the perfect examples, and I don't want to speak for Reed, but I think I will concur. In my notes, Gary Moore-ish. It's very sweepingly melodic. And what he does here is not unlike what a lot of great jazz soloists are taught. That when you go into an improvisation section, especially a ballad, what should you do your first chordal progression go through? Do the melody. Just recapitulate the melody. And that's what, in a sense, what he is doing here is giving us another vocal interpretation of this song, and then he does his thing. And it's so beautifully done, and it is so sweepingly epic. You know, he used, legato. It's just connected. It's not broken and harsh, and it's not riff space, lick space. It's got continuity, and it just flows beautifully. And I never get the sense that Simon could run out of ideas. I think his stream of consciousness from here to his fingers is highly intact. And he can think it and then reproduce it, which to me is the absolute definition of technique. The ability to play what you want to play when you need to play it. That's technique to me. It can be slow, fast, anything in between. I love how it goes. The only kind of knock I have on it is at the end. This one just kind of repeats a little bit too long. I don't need that. If I were you, just maybe half as many and we'd be okay. And again, but they didn't fade out. They gave it an ending, which I enjoyed. It's a solid track, and it was a very nice, it's 6, so it's right into the kind of the midpoint of the album. I think it's in the right spot. Our ears needed that. And it was nice to hear just Simon go off and do his thing, and it was very impressive.
So we're halfway through the album, Pete. So you comforted in this listening experience, say the first time through, that Simon is playing? You feel comfortable that he's got the right fit for the band, and you're thinking that the band's in safe hands halfway through?
Yeah, but you can be confused. And you had to let it play out because, again, I'd heard a lot of his live stuff. And his live stuff was playing somebody else's material. I didn't know what he was going to bring of himself. And that's always the true test. Who is Simon? Well, we know he can do the Highway Star solo note for note and kick the holy crap out of it. And he can do this Blackmoreism. He can do this Morris thing. He can do that, and he's a perfect choice for them in that aspect. But the real test is right here, original material, red lights on, bring me something. And he's
his own personality.
He's hitting it out of the ballpark.
Yeah. Okay. Reed, what do you think of If I Were You?
Well, many of the same thoughts that Peter had. I like where it's placed. I'm not always the biggest fan of ballads, but they do form a nice palate cleanser. We've just had this loose. I don't know that I'd go so far as to call it punky, but it's definitely loose in structure, old Fangled Thing. And the song we get next, and this is where I really heard the Gary Moore, because the opening of this is very Parisian Walkways. And Gary could really do lyrical playing when he wanted to. In fact, it's not very common for players to be good at both lightning speed playing and nice, lyrical melodic playing. And Simon does have both of those covered. The rest of it, I think, is a pretty standard ballad. I do like that the keys are not as overpowering as they are on the first set of tracks. This is the first song where I felt like Don has stepped back and Simon has moved forward a little bit in the mix. By the way, I forgot to mention on Old Fangled Thing in my notes, I do have, hey, I can finally hear Roger Glover. That was really the first song where I could hear the bass line.
Right.
But It's nice. And like I said, I do like that it's a nice palate cleanser. Interestingly, it's also the second longest song on the album. So this album, for some reason, when I think of the Bob Ezrin albums Infinity, Rapture of the Deep, and Whoosh, those albums feel like they have long songs, but they rarely do. Most of the songs are around 4 minutes long, and that's the same on this album. The shortest song is 3 minutes and 18 seconds, and the longest song is not even 6 minutes. It's 5 minutes and 50 seconds. And there's only one song longer than 5 minutes on the entire album. So it is a very concise album, and I do like that they're able to make their points pretty quickly. And this is the first song said on the album that to me I'm like, yeah, this is Simon's song. He owns this one. I think the vocals nice. Ian does a good ballad, but frankly the lyrics aren't up to oh, my brain. After Old Fangled Thing, which I thought the lyrics were so brilliant. The lyrics on this one are fine, but they're not as good as the previous tracks.
I think Ian Gillan's vocals in this one are a little pitchy, but that's not necessarily to the detriment of the song because it shows fragility, emotion, sincerity. So I think a lot of Gillan's vocals on this album are not pitch perfect. He's 78, and we get into the pinching, which we discussed, Pete, on The Battle Rages On. So I think a song or two coming soon. We'll talk about it. But this song, he really shows his age, and I think it works for the benefit of the song. So when I say it's pitchy, I don't mean it in a negative sense. I think in a sense that he's being raw and he's exposing himself and he's selling the lyric. And the lyric is quite simple, but he sings it with conviction. And I just think the tonality of his voice matches the lyricism. And it just makes the experience all the more powerful. McBride's guitar lines are controlled. I don't think he overplays. There are some guitarists where the song serves the guitar. The guitar serves the song all the way through, and McBride plays that perfectly. I wrote down Wasted Sunsets. I think this is like a little bit of a cousin or a daughter or a son. There's another ballad which is even more overtly Wasted Sunsets. We'll talk about that. And Pete, another thing, you hear the double tracking of Gillan's vocals. It eventually comes in. You know how you don't like how there's a bit of double tracking? It eventually comes in. But in this song, it adds
works
gravitas.
Better here than on the more up-tempo tracks.
More sweeping, more symphonic. So I didn't like this song the first time I heard it, but over time and repeated listens, I like it a lot. So I think it's in the right place, and it's a mighty fine song. All right, Pictures of You. This was the second song off the album. Pete, what do you think of this song?
I think this one, not unlike Portable Door, is kind of safe. You can't go too far wrong with this one. It's certainly not stretching any new territory. It's just a kind of a straightforward mid-tempo. Again, we've got unison with the keys and the guitar. Broken record, right? To me, this is really just Gillan delivering a chorus and a verse and the choruses with some very good, but not outstanding instrumental accompaniment to it. You get down to the solo section. Again, it's very melodic, and I'm enjoying that. But for the most part, it's really all about Gillan here on this track for me. And he really carries the day on this one. They do a nice harmony double tracking guitar part towards the end, which is a new element. And I thought that was nice. And then they do have this kind of out of nowhere broken down, kind of just loose, free-formed ending, with some bells and some, things going on there that just is not really in any tempo. It's just kind of a broken open section, which I'm not sure had anything to do with anything we had heard previously. I mean, it's just an ending. I put it's an okay track, not great. So really, it just everything I hung on this one was Gillan's vocals, because that's what I hear when I think of this track. The instrumental part really didn't do much for me.
Okay. Reed.
Kind of similar, I guess. I'm shocked to hear that this was the second single, because I would have picked a much more up-tempo song. And actually, this is, I think, one of the few sequencing missteps on the album, because I think following a languid ballad with a mid-tempo song gives you a continued feel of slowness, of lack of energy. A more up-tempo song would have given more of a feeling that you were getting back into an energetic album. That said, I really love Ian Gillan's lyrics on this song. And now, anytime you talk about lyrical interpretation, you're bringing yourself into that. So I'm sure I'm projecting all kinds of things here. But I hear Ian Gillan talking about the Instagram generation, because he's talking about how somebody is taking pictures of themselves and acquiring fame, but when he sees them in person, they don't really look all that good. And maybe it's not worth the cost that they're paying. They've given up, they're working in the day and then burning the candle at both ends to be a celebrity. And that really does sound like he's talking about influencers. But maybe he's not. Maybe he had something different, because the language he uses is, for those who are about our age, it's the way people used to describe modeling in the 1980s. Mm-hmm. So it's an old man's language. We're old men. I own it. It's an old man's language, but talking about, I think, a modern subject using old language. So I find all of that really quite outstanding in terms of the artistic achievement of this album. And I think it's the second song where I read the lyrics and went, yeah, all right, I'm on board with that. And other than that, other than I wish it was faster, or whatever song was going to be in this slot, I wish it was faster and more energetic. But other than that, it's fine. It's safe. It's fun. There was nothing about this song that you were going to listen to and go, hey, it's the new Deep Purple. It's not. It's the current Deep Purple.
Well, I think I like this song better than you, gentlemen. I think this song gets better as it goes deeper into the track. It kicks in halfway through the song. It goes a bit more up-tempo, and I really, really, truly love that wonderful, delicate ethereal keyboard outro. It comes completely out of the blue, and it's out of the box, and it's just something unusual. So it's like this song builds up steam. It's somebody has flicked on a switch, and it just gets better and better and better. I love the double tracking guitar, which is quite unusual, very Deep Purple, and I love Gillan's lyrics and his vocals, very warm, sincere, and engaging. I could imagine, I wrote down this could be a 70s or 80s radio hit, but that's just how I hear it. What I also like is how it segues into the next song, I'm Saying Nothing. So, gentlemen, do you like the way it segues completely? There's no space in between the song. It just goes directly into I'm Saying Nothing. Pete?
Yeah, I didn't mind it. But Reed makes a very good point. So what have we done? We've had a ballad go into a just slightly less ballad-like, very safe, gentle track, to a slow, grimy, dirty riff thing. Now, that increases heaviness, but does it increase the energy level or the excitement level? That's up to the listener to decide. I would have preferred this track coming off of something, as Reed, I think, appropriately mentioned. If you had put an up-tempo track after the ballad, have an up-tempo track, segue right into something dirty and grimy afterwards, I'm all in. Because now I'm loving the stylistic changes through that whole section and what it's doing there. I think the drums sound better here. And I had to make a note that finally I like what Don is doing by adding color to the guitar parts. We don't have this just continuous unison that is droning over the top of most of the track. And I think it really makes the track sound more like how I like my Deep Purple. A distinct keyboard part, a distinct guitar part. How do they fit together? How do they blend together? And without always playing the same thing. I think the vocals are really solid. I put Gillen is just really great on here. You got a solo section again. This time it's guitar and then organ. It's just such a great guitar tone. It's just at this point, I'm just anything he wants to do. I'm like, okay, I'm happy with it, and I'm just like, go play what you're gonna play. I'm already on board because I love how it sounds, and that's part of the process. And more than half the battle. If you like how it sounds, you're already winning the game in my book. But it's not a very different song. I think there's just a slight lull in, if I was to graph the tracks, it starts and it's kind of gone like this, and it's kind of in this weird downslope. And if the album had ended around the 9 or 10 tracks, I think I'd have a totally different view of this. And then I'll comment as we move forward of what happens with it right here. Because that's where I think we are. We've gone down a little bit. This run of 2 or 3 songs here doesn't stand up to the first 3 or 4 tracks and how they felt and how they were hitting me, and the energy and the excitement and the amount of vesting in those tracks I was doing emotionally and listening wise. So we'll see where it goes after this, but I'm not saying nothing yet.
Yeah. Well, I'll say it. The Peter Kerr rule of thumb for a rock record should be around about 35 to 40 minutes, 10 tracks. I think this album's too long. It runs about 50, 55 minutes. There's 13 songs. I think we could lose 3. And I'm starting...
Be determined.
What's that?
To be determined.
Yeah, I think it's a bit too long. Reed, what do you think of this song and maybe what I've just said?
Yeah, well, one, I agree. And if I were going to eject a song, boy, I don't know whether I would feel. I'm sorry, I'm looking up at my notes here. I've got a screen behind my screen. I'm not sure whether I would take off "I'm Saying Nothing" or because I love the lyrics of "Pictures of You" so much, although I'm not super excited by the song. But I absolutely agree that the middle of the album, while still enjoyable, is the lull, but they can't all be here.
No.
And I will go so far as to say having some tracks that are not quite as good makes the good tracks even better.
That's one way to look at it.
Yeah, and I've heard Martin Popoff talk about the Peaks and Valleys albums, that were a lot of times his favorite albums. When he's really doing the deep dive, he's like, you know what, I only love 3 songs on this album. But it's the contrast with the other songs that make it feel like the whole thing is so good. And that's kind of the way I honest to God, even after listening to this album so many times and making notes, I have nothing to say about this song. I've actually already gone all over everything that I had down in my notes. I realized that I've given as feedback to other songs. So it's fine. I like it, but it's not memorable.
Yeah. Look, I think it's a filler track, and I think this is probably the weakest Gillan vocal. His vocals are strained. It doesn't feel right. It's not like a nice fit. And Don Area is doing these bells and whistles keyboard sounds to kind of bring something out of the bag. And that's what Don does. When the song is maybe average and maybe a little bit below par, he brings in some trickery just to, maybe a little bit of mayonnaise to make it seem better than it actually is. Um, Pacey, he pushes it along. His drumming's strong, but other than that, I think it's a bit of a filler track, and I think I could easily lose this. I think the most excitement I had out of this was the segue from the previous song, because it was just so unexpected, going from Pictures of You to this, and I'm going, oh, that's interesting. And then you get into this song, and it's not that memorable. All right, Pete, this was the third single, Lazy Sod. Were you sold on this song?
I enjoy this. Again, as I spoke on one of the earlier tracks, I will never not be excited about a quarter note shuffle from Ian Pace. It's just so familiar for me, and I love it. And, it's got kind of a strange kind of woman vibes and that kind of thing to it. Great chunky guitar, nice color from Airy. Again, they're now starting to separate more, and I'm really liking that. The mix is too hot on this one. Clearly on this one just sounds right on the edge, and if not over the edge at some point, which does bother me. Pacey on this is just awesome. I just love what he's doing. The hooks are good. You can't, it's hard to get that chorus out of your head. And that's a tribute to Gillan and the melodic and the wordplay that he's using. It's strong solos from both Simon and an organ solo from Don. And what I do love is what I mentioned earlier, that sometimes Don will go back and do too many hand swipes and things like that. He does this beautiful classical organ interlude that just, it's very old school classical, and I love that, how it returns right to the chorus. And I thought that was awesome, because to me, that's a familiarity. That is a trademark. That is a nod to John, and of course Don is a brilliant classical musician as well, so it's something natural to him. But it really worked. It was a nice throw in that was different from their standard soloing that they were doing. Very tight unison playing at the end with really great syncopation, and I thought it was edgy and I thought it was aggressive. And I put favorite track on the album so far for me. I actually really enjoyed this one, and my curve is starting to uptick. I'll just say that.
Thank you. I might even insert a graph as we're going along. The Peter Jones graph.
Right.
Lazy Sod. What do you think of this one, Ree?
I also love this track. I think that this track is the most blues rock of all of the tracks. It has the most blues structure. And again, as all of the people who hate me for my ZZ Top opinions know, I'm not a blues fan, but I like bluesy. And it provides contrast. And that's really what this song is about to me. Because we've had that low energy section. I don't know where this album's going. Oh, hey, it's going to blues rock. Yeah, this is it. Now, again, this is a track that I think McBride fits in best on the bluesier stuff. I think that at heart, he views himself as a blues rock player, despite the prodigious chops that he possesses.
Right.
and he gets a fantastic solo in this song. Also, I think this is territory that Ian Gillan has trod well before. And I honestly think that people are going to listen to this and go, "Oh, Lazy Sod, lazy." Ian Gillan likes to sing about how he's relaxed in life, which is kind of funny because I bet if you ever met him, he's drunk and intense. Has he given up drinking? I don't think so. I don't
I
get
don't
that
think so.
impression.
No.
But yeah, I think it's a fun song, and I love it. Don't have too much to add beyond that over what Pete already said.
Well, the background to the lyrics of Lazy Sod was that he read an article that Dolly Parton has written 5,000 songs. And he thought to himself, well, I've got a lot of catching up to do. I'm a bit of a lazy sod. So that's the background to why he's called Lazy Sod. I love it. Best song on the album. It's pop-tastic. It's got that strange kind of woman groove swing, Pete, you know what I love about Deep Purple? The swing. They swing.
Preaching to the choir.
Demon's Eye. Love
Yeah.
it. Razzmatazz. It's just, and Reed, you know how you were saying that there's songs, riffs, melodies? This is the song that is the most likely that once you finish listening to the album, you'll hear this in your head. There's a bit of earworm. This is easily the best of the three singles. Maybe should have been the first, but I love it. I think it swings. It's got groove, engaging lyric, and yeah, not much more to say. All right, now you're talking, Pete.
Up tempo, full rocker. I love this track. Absolutely love it. It drives. It's got all kinds of energy. Gillan is just smoking on this. His delivery, and there's a lot of syllables in what he's firing through. There's a lot of words here. I couldn't even sit here and read them without screwing up. And what I put down here, this fits perfectly in that Machine Head, Who Do We Think We Are era. I think this is just right in the wheelhouse. I think they're fun lyrics. I love how Ian Gillan, Pacey goes back and forth. He brings the kind of the highway star riding on the snare drum groove that he's so good at. He brings that back in, and he's just firing off things all over the place. There's a gorgeous highway star-like interlude between Simon and Don that's going through, that's kind of got that middle section that John Lord brought to them. He's like, well, it sounds like this. He said, well, what did you really? It's kind of like a Bach thing, and off they go. And when they finally hit the solo proper, all I wrote down was Chuck Berry meets Steve Vai. Because all of a sudden he starts his solo, total double stop, Chuck Berry throwback, and then all of a sudden he's into full-on hammering, he's everywhere. He just, within one solo, he just kind of went through the whole history of rock guitar soloing, and it's so seamless, and it sounds so perfect. And here's where and Peter, you had mentioned it. To me, the keyboard solo here from Don sounds way more appropriate for Rainbow than it does for Deep Purple. And that was a specific note. So when you had said that earlier, I'm like, remember that, because I knew that was in my notes. That one doesn't fit as well, but Simon's was off the charts. They go back to the snare. It's just got huge fills, and then they just go back to full-on driving time, and they just are crushing it rhythmically. So much energy. So then I get screwed because it's the first song that fades out, and you don't give me a proper ending. And I'm like, damn. And I was so frustrated. I'm like, come on, you're just crushing it. Give me something tight and unique. But it's so energetic, and I had to write down, it's now my new favorite track on the album. My curve is upticking. Now we're talking.
That's what I like about this show because I think we've all got different takes on this. Reed, what do you think of
Well,
this
I
one?
think I think it's very appropriate that Peter's curve is upticking because this is hands down the horniest song on the album. This song is so in your face, blatant. It's a song about a wild party that turns into an orgy. He's not even this isn't even a double entendre. He's got lyrics in there about there are people doing it on the stairs, and it's a menage of I don't know how many, but they're really enjoying themselves. Um, and in that sense, I think it is both very much like a who do we think we are era track, but this is Peter K in this case. Man, it's not easy doing shows with two Peters. You have to follow where my finger is. I know you can't see that either. Peter K in this case. This is the one that I said. This sounds like a Gillan track. You could like off of Mr. Universe, something in that era, because it's got
Future
that
Shock. Yeah.
It's got that wild energy. It's sexual. It's at a very up tempo, and he's writing about all of these goings on. The only reason that it doesn't sound like he's writing about the 70s is because he mentions one guy fishing his cell phone out of the bowl.
Right.
I think it's unhinged.
So, yeah, it really reminds me of the kind of stuff he was doing with Gillan. I think Ritchie would not have let him do this song in Deep Purple in the days that Ritchie cared enough to actually pay attention to the lyrics. And I don't know if Gillan still, again, I haven't, one of these days I'll watch the documentary. I just haven't got around to watching the documentary yet. But in the olden days, lyrics were the last thing that Gillan did. So he did not contribute. The songs had to be completely recorded. And I know Bernie Torme used to complain about it because he said Gillan gave us nothing. You know, I didn't have a melody to work with. We just had to write a song, and then Gillan would come in and do lyrics over it. I don't know if that's how they did this track, but I'm just saying I think that if Gillan had brought these lyrics to Ritchie would have said no, I don't think so.
Yeah.
But I love it. It's a great track. It's probably, I don't know, my second or third favorites. No, probably third favorite song on the album, but I think it's a lot of fun.
Gents, I've got a different take on this song. I don't think this is a fine vocal performance by Gillan. I think his vocals are very strange and they're kind of pinchy. Pete, can you sort of, he kind of feels breathless, and this is one where I feel that he's really straining it. He's in a certain vocal range in his life, and this one may be like a feel too far. Am I a little bit out of order here?
When he says OMFG, the state of me, man, whatever happened to my hair, in that
Yeah.
you know what? At this stage, I'm forgiving just about anything he's going to do. I appreciate the intent. I love that he's even trying it, and I'm not trying to hold him against 70s age Gillan. Hell, I can't do what I did 5 years ago.
I know, but to me, this is a little bit, it's more noticeable. And the diction, I've listened to this song multiple times, is not very clear. And there's a lot of words. There's a lot of wordsmithing in this particular song. And if I wasn't reading the lyrics, which Reed dutifully did, I wouldn't know what it's about. It's a little bit of a blur. So I'm not as sold on this song, but musically, I think the band's got game. There's some nice arpeggio lead breaks from McBride. It's tasty, but I'm not sold on the vocals. And my graph is it's going a little bit down on this one. No Money to Burn. Pete.
If I may just interject for a second in Gillan's defense, as is common with a lot of people who get older, Ian now has a pronounced lisp in the way he speaks. And it seems just only plausible that predilection to his dialect is going to be present in the way he sings. And I say that because I think in a lot of spots in here, his diction is so clear that I can hear his new lisp, which I think is brilliant, because it says to me that he's being very clean and very authentic to who he is. That's maybe a small detail or a small nitpick, but I hear it and I'm like, that's who he is. Because when you hear him speak now, you can hear it, and it's not a detriment. It's anything to be ashamed or embarrassed about. We're all going to get one, and that's just the way it's going to be. But so I give, like I said, I probably give him a lot more leeway.
Yeah.
And
anyway,
okay.
Just a different view.
No money to burn. 70s feel here. It's down and gritty, heavy, very, very driving. Again, I don't like the snare drum sound. And it's just so taken for granted because he's always had the best sounding snare drums throughout his whole life. And I'm just like, if you just fix that damn thing, this would just really sparkle for me. But the rest of the kit sounds good. The cymbals sound nice. And what I love here is how much space there is.
Ha! Sorry. That's the exact word I have in my notes. So I agree with that. Yeah.
Yes.
I was going to bring up that.
You can finally hear the drums breathe during the groove. That it's just not bombarded by constant sonic assaults from the other instrumentalists. To me, it's kind of got that Nobody's Home feel, where the drums are driving and then the instruments dance in and out of it. It's got so much room. The bass drum sounds the biggest it does on the whole record, because now you can actually hear it. It's not being taken up by organ and everything else. I love the got no money, got no cash, got no moolah, got no stash. He just says the same thing over and over. He just keeps using different words. He's just so smart like that. Lost my deposit, I never learned. I got no money to burn. You're like, okay, I can relate. Anybody can relate. You're like, that makes sense. That makes sense. I do love this kind of doomy riff with the huge organ underneath it. And man, what a razor-focused guitar tone on this. It's just so crystalline and just edgy, but in such a beautiful musical kind of way. Too much synth. We got Don on his synth again, and I'm like, wow, that I can't think of a single Purple record where there's this much synthesizer on it.
House of the Blue Light maybe would be the last one where John went a bit modern. That's a point of reference for me.
I mean, there's synthesizer on Burn, but not nearly to this degree. Of course, they don't have nearly as many tracks, so we can be fair about that. But I like it. It's strong. It's aggressive. I think it fits beautifully in this run that they've kind of started it from Lazy Sod. I'm still in a good upward trajectory. I'm really enjoying the back third of this record so far, which is very unusual for a lot of records, especially ones that are this long. A lot of times they were like, okay, filler. The good stuff was early, filler. I don't see this as filler. I think this is a good, heavy, aggressive, hard rocking tune, and I like it. So,
all right, thanks, Pete. Reed.
Yeah, very much similar. Once again, and seriously, I thought that was so funny because my one thing that really stands out is how much space there is in this track. And by way of comparison, after listening to it, it makes you kind of reevaluate what you've already heard and just go, dang, there is no breathing room in those other songs. Not even the ballad. Even the ballad is very crowded. But in this, there's actual parts that are just the drums and vocals. And that's actually a very nice sound, and it's not one you get anywhere else on the album, so it really stands out. And this is only the second track where there's enough space that you hear that I hear Roger Glover.
Right.
And possibly that's also because on these bluesier type songs, it has a blues structure to it. Simon is not doing the exact same part as Roger. I don't know if that's because Roger is also more comfortable in this structure, or it's just that they made the decision as a band that they weren't going to have the keyboards and guitar as prominent, but you can hear the bass. And that is also a nice thing to bring in. Other than that, it's not one of my favorite tracks on the album, but I like it, and I think it is carrying the momentum forward.
Well, I think the irony of this song is because there's so much space, it's arguably one of the heaviest songs on the album. It's got such a deep groove. I love that organ guitar, that bluesy sound. It's really just got this really heavy sound. It reminds me of the Fireball era. I think this could really slot in Fireball side two, maybe.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I've got nothing much more to say. I think you gents have summed it up pretty perfectly on that one. I'll Catch You. So this is the other ballad. Pete, what do you think of this one?
Yeah, and to follow up what I said on the first ballad, you can only have an opinion until you hear something to contrary that. I think this is the stronger of the two ballads. I think it's beautifully concise. I love the feel of it. It's just at the right tempo. There's some piano in here. Hey, how many tracks did that take to get some piano in there? It's interspersed with other keyboards that are double tracked and other things that are in there, but it instantly stands out. And this is all vintage Gillan. I think his delivery on this is great. The melody is great. All of it is, and again, it flows so easily. At only 3 minutes and 20 seconds, there's not a lot of fooling around here. It's not going off on these tangents and that thing. The only part of it that is there, and I'm so glad that it is this sweeping and gloriously epic guitar solo from Simon. And what I wrote down here, and get your takes on this, because to me, they're kind of in the same camp, although they play very differently. I go, wow, this was very Schenker-esque. Just so gloriously melodic. Long notes, leading all into each other, like they're all being sung. Like, some of the really great Schenker moments with UFO on now brain fart, their live album. Was it Strangers in the Night, right?
Strangers in the Night, yes.
Yeah, good grief. I'm back now. And some of the moments that you can just sing every note that Schenker is playing, and it is so perfect. It's not too over the top. It's not too reserved. It's exactly what it needs to be. It's the perfect length. Didn't need to go any longer than that. And I think it's an exceptionally well done ballad. And I really enjoyed it. And I thought it was great where it is. After that run of tracks, we're 4 in now from kind of my uptick. And I'm loving this back section of the record, and I think this one really plays a good part. And again, take a breather. We come from a track with more space to a ballad with even more space, and it really lets you kind of reset. And you're okay. There's one track left. What are we going to get?
All right, nicely put, Pete. Reed, what do you think of I'll Catch You?
Well, I agree with most of that. My main concern with this song is that it is, again, structurally nearly identical to the first ballad.
Yes.
I think it's an upgrade, but it starts with that, that beautiful melodic solo, and then you go into the lyric, and it's um, this was the only song that at the end of it I went, wait, there was no keyboard solo in this. There's keyboard, but there's no keyboard solo. And then I keep forgetting to pay attention enough during the first ballad to remember whether there's a keyboard solo there. But in this one, it really stands out that there's no keyboard solo. So again, I do think that in these slower, more lyrical playing styles where Simon really shines, even though he's got monster chops. I have said many times in the year of our Lord 2024, monster chops aren't enough. There are too many players out there that have astounding chops. What you do with them matters to me much more than how fast he is. And I would rather listen to something like the intro solo on this song than the super fast synchronized playing with Don Airy. You listen to that once and go, wow, that was really impressive. Oh, they're doing it again. Oh, they're doing it again. Kind of heard that trick once. I will say I'm not sure you need both ballads on the album, but you do need palate cleansers of some sort. And I like the ballads better than I like the lower energy rockers on the album.
I think this is one of the best songs in the album. I think it's a beautiful lullaby to Ian Gillan's late life. I think it's obviously, there's a lot of sentiment towards his late wife. It's heartfelt, it's emotional. I think it's the best Gillan vocal. And I think the guitar playing is probably McBride's some of his best playing on this album. And again, it's another relative of Wasted Sunsets. Even melodically, it's not too dissimilar. So I think it's in the right spot. The second last song, it's a little bit of an overture to the last one. I think it's the perfect song, and it's probably it's either between this and Lazy Sod is my favorite song on the album. I think it's wonderful. It's pure bliss.
Wonderful.
All right, guys. Business End. The last song, Bleeding Obvious. Pete, is it bleeding obvious?
Well, you have gone through those tracks. If you're still progressing through the record, you've kind of gone through a pretty big undertaking. It's a lot to listen to. It's a lot to absorb. It's long, which in a lot of today's listening styles, it's a lot to expect from a lot of listeners that they ever even get to this point. But to Purple's credit, they're going, if you're going to be here, we've got something for you. So we've come over these softer, open things, and you're cleansed. And so what do? Well, they throw the kitchen sink at you. Everything is all in this one track at once. What have we got? Ridiculous odd tempo unison flame throwing playing right off the bat with crazy syncopation and just masterful playing. And all of a sudden it just changes to straight standard time in this really heavy kind of blues based ripping grip of this riff, where Gillan just starts soaring over the top of all of it. And you're like, oh, okay, what was that? Especially coming from the ballad, you're like, oh, wow, okay. And I'm like, it's just so huge. Everything just sounds so enormous and impactful. And it really hits not only as it delivers on its own, but again, based on what came before it. We get through this section, great vocals, great lyrics. We come into I want to talk about this solo section because all of a sudden, and everybody wants to talk about it, let's, is he like Blackmore? Is he this? Who is he? Whatever. And what do we have here? Our first and only jaunt into the neoclassical world. It's short, it's brief, but damn if it doesn't stand out like crazy, because it is sonically different than anything Simon has played on this entire album. And you're going, and the hairs kind of went up on my arm, and I'm like, okay, you sly dogs, what are you doing here? And you're like, that was cool as F. And you're like, and again, it's brief, it's short, but it was so moving and so powerful. And these are almost, dare I say, dream theater like riffs that they're just darting in and out together, and it's thick and complex. And this is not a straightforward rock blues song. This is some serious playing from probably one of the most talented bands that have ever existed, musicianship wise. They go to this they have this bells that are coming in, and then they get to the end, they've got this great unison riff that they're just firing away, while Gillan is just going over this whole thing. I go, new life, new spirit, new power. They're just crushing it. Wow. And I'm just like, if you're going to close a record, there it is. And if you're going to experiment, and if you're going to do all this outreaching, and they're going to say, hey, you know what? Like I said, if you're with us 50 plus minutes in, here. And they just went, enjoy it, have at it. And I'm right with you. And I think this track just crushes. I loved how it ended. And it finishes my very strong uptick on the bottom third of that record for me. You're muted, Peter.
And Pete, if this is the last album of Deep Purple, this is the last song of Deep Purple. Pretty mighty fine way to finish, you think?
I'm okay with that.
Okay.
More than okay with that.
Reed, what do you think?
I would really like to know where in the writing process for this album they composed this song. Who knows? Maybe it says on the documentary that I keep saying I haven't watched. There's probably all kinds of information in there that I should have looked up before doing this, but I never look at the background material before having the chat. I want my opinions to be my own and untainted by the truth.
Right.
In any case, I love Bleeding Obvious. So also another measure to me of a solid record is if on repeated listens, a different track becomes my favorite song. And this is, after listening to this, I don't even know how many times I've listened to this, 10, 12, to prepare for the show. After all of that, Bleeding Obvious is my favorite track. I love the changes of mood. I love the changes of tempo. I love the slower passages, and there's the piano. I actually didn't really notice the piano in No Money to Burn, but Bleeding Obvious has this Bleeding Obvious piano section. And it's great. They slow down. It utterly changes the mood of the song, but it doesn't stop. Stop, start is always bad. It's just a line that continues, but it's just a completely different feel. Simon McBride gets to go absolutely nuts. The whole band is firing. But it has one big false note to me, and that is towards the end of the song, when they get to the section that would have been a much better title than Equals One. When Gillan is singing the lyric, it all adds up to one. They do this choir effect on the vocal. I don't know if it's other singers, if it's Gillan being multi-tracked, but it's the only time on the entire album that they do that. So it makes that passage stand out like a sore thumb. To what end? If they had used that whole phrase as the album title, I would have gone, that's a little over the top, but fine. Instead, it provides the concept, and they make the album title something that I think is considerably less interesting. And now the fact that lyric stands, it's like lit up in neon, and I'm like going, but you didn't even use that damn lyric for your title. Why are you emphasizing it like that? And it makes this weird dissonance. But that's the only false step in the song. Other than that, I love the fact that this album starts and ends with such strong tracks. And I have this long-standing theory that if the first and last things you hear on an album are great, your mind is going to fill in the space between them and tell you that was an excellent album.
100%. Yeah. I agree. I think this is top 3 of my favorite songs on the album. There's a lot of Egypto chords, as Martin Popoff says. It's got that sort of Eastern feel. So maybe that's a little bit of a nod to Richie Blackmore. He loves the Egypto chords. I love the bit at 3 minutes and 16 seconds into the song where there's a key change and Gillan just sings in this lower register. And I don't know, it's like he's saying farewell. It's like he's saying goodbye. I think it's a very emotional part of the song. It has a bit of a twist, and it sweeps you along. I love the time signature, the chordal changes on this song. I think the arrangement's masterful. I think they're just playing out of their skins, and it's a mighty fine finish to the album. And Pete, yeah, there's an element of everything but the kitchen sink, isn't there?
Right.
Just throwing it in.
Hey, I forgot to mention something. The start of this song, and you guys tell me if I'm nuts here, because if it hasn't come up, I was never a Rush fan. It's just one of those things. I didn't know anybody who listened to Rush. I never got into Rush. Not saying that I wouldn't like Rush. They're on my list, but I'll get to them sometime in the past. The opening section of this song, though, sounds like Rush to me.
Yeah.
And I don't know what song, but I listened to it and went, this sounds like some Rush song from the 80s, I'm thinking, because that's when I heard them. So something moving pictures-esque. But
the syncopations remind me of the inner parts of Natural Science. That
is the section that I'm thinking of right there.
Yeah, it's the Natural Science. Yeah.
I also had Strange Ways. Strange Ways off House of Blue Light. That sort of Eastern feel to it.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's almost got a. It's kind of like a heavier, more updated version of the riff in Seventh Heaven. It's not nearly as aggressive as this one, but I just think it's, and Reed, your point is so valid because, if this is the last thing they did, and they're like, hey, how much time do we have left? Can we do another one? And they're like, hey, let's just do one for us. Screw everything else and let's go. and just play.
I'm kind of leery of that though, because the last time that they said, hey, look, we've just got some time, let's do an album for us, they came out with Turning to Crime, and I hate that album.
Well, yeah, one song versus an album, maybe they just at this point they're like, let's just cut loose.
I think that album was a COVID filler. We've got some time on our hands, let's do it. But I really get the feel this could be it. This could be the last album. I'd be very surprised if they can squeeze one more out, but who knows? So, guys, this has been epic. So thank you very much for your contributions and your opinions of this album. Let's do a final around the grounds as to your summation of the album. Do you like it? Do you not like it? What's your views? So, Pete, final words?
Sure. Such an honor to be with both of you. Such great insight, such great thoughtfulness and passion that you both bring, which is inspiring. And I know that carries over to the people who watch. So as a participant as well as a contributor, I thank both of you. it's a very strong record for me, and I'm hoping that with even more repeated listens, I'm going to find even more gems here and there that I'm attaching to. I will cop out. I'm not going to give it a ranking yet, but I will tell you that I am wildly excited by it. It's got a lot of the elements that I've kind of been missing. I don't want to. It's not about Simon versus Steve or Richie or anything else, but anytime somebody new comes in, this is a chance to inject feelings, emotions, energy. I love Clive Burr, but I have to admit that when Bruce and Paul Di'Anno, when Bruce joined, it had a certain new, and when Nico joined, it had a certain newness. Now, does that make it better over the long run? That's your decision. But there is a new energy here. There is a new sense, but it has to be tempered because who they are and where they are in their lives. This isn't someone we're going to go, hey, we're going to get another, sadly, realistically, we're not going to get another 10, 15, 20-year career out of this. It's just not in the cards. And from that aspect, I really actually hold this even a little closer to the vest. If, in fact, this is the last one they do, it really means even more to have it be something that I really respect and something that I really appreciated, and know that they can hold their head up high, and I can hold my head up with them and go, good on you. You did it, and this is really strong. And let the chips fall where they may, where people want to rank it or anything else. It's way more about emotional attachment to me now, and that emotional attachment is strong and secure, and that means more to me than anything else. So,
Well said, mate. That's why I have you on this show. Can't say much more. Read Little.
Yeah, I really like it. And I'll say again, I think that Bob Ezrin is just knocking it out of the park in his late career. The albums that he has done with Deep Purple and Alice Cooper are all no worse than excellent. But until this album, I actually, for my purposes, I would have given Alice Cooper the nod. But he just put out, Alice Cooper just did The Road, which is a fine album, but this is a better album. Everybody check your expectations. They're not doing Machine Head Part 2, and my God, if they tried, it would suck.
Yeah, it would.
Because they're in their late 70s now. Let them move on. It has energy. And the fact that it's as good as it is and as energetic as it is, with 4 players over 70, 3 of them much closer to 80 than 70, and a producer who's just as old, and frankly, just one young guy in the band, it's remarkable. So they can absolutely hold their heads up and say this is a great album. It's better than anyone had a right to expect, but it is not vintage Mark II, and frankly, I think it's a better album for that.
Well, I think this is the best album they've put out since Perfect Strangers. 30
Wow.
years. I rated that highly. I think it's just a fine vintage piece of rock mastery. So I won't say too many words, but to our viewers, it's a rich and rewarding listen. I've lived with it for a week, listened to it plenty of times, and the more you listen to it, it's like a Russian doll. You unpeel it and there's another layer. Oh, I heard that sound. Oh, that lyric. There's always things that you pick up in the subsequent listen. So I think it's a mighty fine album, and for a band to still pull out such high quality works is just a sight to behold. All right, guys. Thank you, Peter Jones. Thank you. Well, Pete's on the Contrarians, plenty of shows. And Reed Little, always a pleasure to have you on the show from the Contrarians. Please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation. Tell us what you think of this album, your favorite tracks, how you think it rates against Mark 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. We love reading your comments, but one thing's for sure, you will see these fine gentlemen on this show during the course of 2024 and beyond. Thank you and good night.